The Gyan is a 400 to 500 point general suit that, while it is space specialized, can fight equally well on the ground or in space. In general, Blue Zuka is a tactic that starts to flag hard after 350 points. Suits can do it, sometimes even very effectively, but it's such a common tactic and so directly easy to counter that it started to lose a lot of its sparkle by the 400 point tier. The Gyan decides it's going to do this tactic right, however, both by having an excellent kit to do this with, and having a secondary weapon and ability set that ensures that if it can't get stuck in, it's much less disadvantaged than other suits. Needless to say, if you get this little bastard from a drop crate, it's no booby prize. Now, it is similar to other Blue Zuka suits in that it benefits directly from upgrades you got for your other suits. It can use the Giant Bazooka, or the variant Giant Bazooka used by the Gundam 2. One of these weapons is used by 16 other suits, and the other by 3. So, in acquiring the improved versions, which you should be doing as a matter of habit if you're using any of these suits that use them, or you're one of the deranged lunatics who prefers using similar weapons on the Gelgug or Freet line, you fricking monster, you're already well represented here. So right out the gate, you have 2 bazookas with almost identical stat lines. The Gundam 2 bazooka reloads, readies, and recycles slightly slower, and it holds less ammo, but it does way more damage, so in general, the Gundam 2 bazooka is the one you want, given the choice. But the standard Giant Bazooka isn't awful, and is only a moderate downgrade. If you're serious about using the suit, however, you absolutely want the Gundam 2 version. Every scrap of damage helps, and on this suit, it helps a lot. So you may be asking yourself, what is it exactly that makes the Gyan more than your average Blue Zuka suit? It's a mid-card general that most people forget about, and tends to get lost in the shuffle with the profusion of high-quality generals that start to show up around this point. The thing is, it's got all the toys that a quality Blue Zuka suit needs. It's got emergency evasion, it's got anti-blast stabilizer, it has a really good melee weapon, but more than that, it has really good maneuverability, excellent mobility, and the golden egg of any Blue Zuka strategy, reach. This reach, which is brought about by the Gyan beam bayonet, is what makes the Gyan so damn amazing, since its downswing covers a frankly stupid area of effect, and can knock down an entire crowd. No joke or exaggeration, I've seen this damn thing knock an entire team down when used right, and it scores 2 hits for good measure. The downside is that, due to the reach, and the flourish that the Gyan does during it, it's really easy to counter if you mistime it, so you gotta be paying attention. Standard strikes from the Gyan are a simple jab straight forward with the beam bayonet, which has good forward reach but virtually no lateral reach, so you need to bear in mind its quirks. This also means that you will virtually never land the downswing on a target if you've already knocked them down, so you should use the forward stab instead when doing follow-up strikes. Backing up the combination of the bazooka and the beam bayonet is a very useful beam gun that fires reasonably quickly, and while the damage isn't really that impressive, it does accumulate stagger, and it staggers in about 4 hits. It also has ASL for easy targeting, and decent range to boot, meaning that, unlike most other Blue Zukas, while you're strong at close range, you aren't necessarily forced to stay there. You can pump some pretty good damage into opponents from downfield, especially if you kit it for raw damage output. As long as you don't overheat the thing, it recharges pretty quick too, so it's a fantastic plinking weapon in an emergency. For those situations where it's just too dangerous to charge in, since you're asking to be front row with a downswing gangbang if you do, you can just sit back comfortably at about 250 meters away and shellac the bejesus out of your enemies. This means you're almost as good at holding a battle line as you are pushing it up, which is an advantage that a hell of a lot of Blue Zuka suits can't really boast. So if you happen to be the kind of player that absolutely loves to ladle out firepower as you close the gap, and then do great damage once you get there, the Gyan may very well be your Bronco trolley. Sadly, it's not all beam bayonets and explosions, and you pay for all this power in a few ways, so we may as well get right into it. While it isn't quite as bad off as the Camphor is defensively, the Gyan has roughly the same ballistic and beam armor as the level 5 variant of the GM Camoufle, which is notably subpar. It does have a lot more HP than other suits of this type, and it's a strong scaler, so at every level above 400, it keeps pace a little better defensively. But starting out at 400, it's a little bit behind the ball, at least in terms of defenses, and you have to compensate for that. That compensation also ties into the Gyan's big secondary problem. Its custom part allocation is harsh. Really harsh. 14 close slots, 10 medium slots, and 4 long slots at 400. That's goddamn painful. And while it's easy as hell to cram on an extra 2,000 or so HP with room to spare, You're going to need custom expansion to squeeze on higher level firing programs, which the suit really benefits from. The problem is, doing that prevents you from cramming on that tiny bit of additional armor you would want at the 400 cost, where it matters the most. In practice, I've found that this kind of results in a coin flip situation where you're either going for raw offense, or you're going to try to shore up a little bit of defense while trying to cram on as much offense as possible. What this means is that usually you have to season your own Gyan to taste, whether you want more offense or more defense, because you really can't do both on this machine. Note that while the Gyan does have space specialization, and is really good there, it lacks some of the features you'd expect from suits that hit around that time. For example, while it has excellent speed, turning speed, and high-speed ambac, it lacks forced injector, and that means that high-speed jinking maneuvers are entirely off the table. You move crazy good in standard space movement, though, which kind of alleviates that, and it can let you save your boosters for when you need them the most. Strategically, I've found that the Gyan excels at being a line-fighting suit. It can push up the battle line, hold the battle line, and keep allied units safe with equal fanfare. And its presence alone can make an enemy melee raid think twice about getting too eager with your team's support if you happen to be on the prowl. With good mobility, it's also a decent vanguard suit and can skirmish fairly well as part of the bargain, though it's not as good at that as the Galbati Alpha or Beta due to lacking emergency evasion too. In general, I've found that the Gyan is a really good troubleshooter suit. It has the ability to engage an opponent in whichever way suits the enemy team least. If it gets well behind the battle line, you can easily screw up enemy supports because its melee damage is nice and high. This also means it's really good at dealing with raids that get a little bit too handsy. You have excellent medium-range damage output and can easily help wear down enemies in an attrition fight. About the only thing you can't do in a suit like this is engage in long range. You really don't want to be on an open battlefield with this suit. If an enemy can keep you at long range, they will absolutely try to padlock you in this suit. So bear all of this in mind, and you'll generally find that your Gyan experience is a lot better than it would be otherwise. Now, the Gyan is directly comparable to a few suits at this tier, namely the Gelgoog, early production Gelgoog, Gelgoog Type VD, and Galbaldi Alpha. At 450, it also contends with the high mobility type Gelgoog and the Galbaldi Beta. So let's go over what all of these offer, and we will compare how the Gyan generally stacks up. Right out the gate, we will begin with the Gelgoogs. The Gyan is notably more fragile, with a smaller shield than any of the four Gelgoogs. But it's also way better in close combat and offers notably better sustained damage output. It's also more maneuverable and has a friendlier engagement range. While it can't hunt and peck like the other Gelgoogs can since they all have beam rifles, and while it doesn't have emergency evasion too like the high mobility type, the added damage and reliability of its melee basically supplants this, making it a more aggressive choice. So while it's not really any better, it's not really any worse either. In contrast, the Galbaldi Alpha is capable of chain stunning in its baseline config, and can be kitted for a generalist Gelgoog loadout with the beam rifle, or as an ambusher with the bullpup, which makes the Alpha way more utilitarian, and the Alpha has much better beam defense and endurance as part of the bargain. It also has emergency evasion too. The problem is that the Alpha pays for all of that by having Camphor level ballistic defense, so its defensive advantages aren't as clear-cut, and the EOS still has better sustained damage. The Beta, meanwhile, is basically the Galbaldi Alpha, but optimized for skirmishing. It has lower defenses and HP than the Gyan, as well as more problems with ammo conservation. So the EOS somehow manages to keep pace pretty effectively here. I mean, yeah, lack of emergency evasion 2 on the EOS sort of sucks, but it manages. The biggest issue that the Gyan has in terms of placement is that while it starts in a very unique spot at 400, it goes through two of the most competitive tiers in the bracket. So let's break out my old tier placement evaluator and see where it lies. So at 400, it's not quite as ridiculously powerful as the Pale Rider line, and it doesn't have quite the toughness or the raw power of the Gelgoog VD or early production Gelgoog, but it's way more maneuverable than either and can pump out considerably more sustained damage downrange. Your other main competitor, the Galbaldi Alpha, is both tougher and has emergency evasion too, but it can't even touch you in terms of sustained damage output unless it's using the machine gun, and it has Camphor tier ballistic defense. All of this means the Gyan EOS is actually placed pretty goddamn well at 400, and provided you've mastered the suit's quirks, it lands squarely in excellent tier. Now at 450, you have to contend with a ton of brutal new arrivals, namely the Alex, Galbaldi Beta, Camphor, and about 8 variants of the Gelgoog that are way better at long range than you. You can no longer really rely on the fact that you have high sustained damage output anymore, since both the Camphor and Alex will absolutely laugh at you, to say nothing of the Gelgoog Marine Commander type. The good news is that due to your hugely beneficial melee moveset, and the fact that most of your weapons are relatively good in range, you still can control the engagement better than most. So while you're not really top of the heap anymore, you're still better off than a lot of other suits would be otherwise, and this places you squarely into good tier. 500 is where things get painful. The biggest problem is that both the Gundam Mark II and the Rick Dia show up here, two suits that beat you for both sustained damage output and melee damage, while having outrageously good skill sets and additional secondaries as part of the bargain. You might think, given this, that that's immediately enough to blast the Gyan EOS out of good tier by its lonesome. In practice, however, the EOS manages to stubbornly hold on, even as like the early production Gelgoog, once its main rival starts to fall well behind. The main reason for this is that it's still doing its job well enough that the only suits that can effectively supplant its position are ones that are bleeding edge. During Gundam Battle Operation 2's last major event, which was a 500 spree at City Ruins, the 500-point variant of the Gyan EOS wound up in the top 10 most used generals list after some of the biggest suits in the game. So it was absolutely holding its own in that event, despite the fact that it's a 2-star general that isn't even specialized for ground combat. All of that is enough to keep it just this side of good tier. Barely. I generally consider going under cost to be an automatic tier reduction, and that is absolutely reflected by the Gyan EOS at 550. Even though it can handle it, and is a way better suit doing this than many of its contemporaries, you really don't want to charge into 550 with a Gyan EOS if you can help it. Suits like the GPO-3, Zaku-3, and Dija are all suits you really do not want to tangle with in the non-cost suit, even one as solid as the Gyan EOS. The fact that so many players have managed to make it work is the only reason I put it in an okay tier for this one, rather than bad. In the current meta, you absolutely do not want to go under cost if you can help it. So, what we can all take home from this is that the Gyan EOS is actually a pretty good suit, one that's comparatively easy to get these days. If you want a solid Blue Zuka suit for 400 or 500 that can both do that job and offer something other than stun into melee as part of the bargain, then it's absolutely worth looking in this direction, especially at 400. And while it's by no means the most powerful suit you're going to see at those tiers, it's interesting enough that not a hell of a lot has managed to completely supplant it, and it definitely remains worth your time. Consider using it.